a notification that the class is being recorded, correct? And right now, I am going to share my screen with you. Very well. So today's class is about, as I mentioned, cosmetic chemistry. So we're going to make cosmetic chemistry as easy as we can. Some of this information will already be part of what some of you have seen in the past, but with a few twists here and there. And of course, I'm going to mention what makes it different and how Pavonia as a company, you know, gives you the information that you need to know as far as formulations. So I'm going to have a general overview of what cosmetic chemistry is in this industry, of course, but I'm going to focus on what Pavonia does so you see exactly how the technologies actually play out. So in this case, we will see exactly what Pavonia accomplishes as part of the formulation, you know, um, steps, which is very important. So we will start with understanding how the skin absorbs cosmetic products. And this is very important. Um, as you know, the skin always behaves as a barrier. We all know that the skin has several physical barriers, but it also has other kinds of barriers. It has an immune barrier, it has an electrophysiological barrier, and of course, you know, the actual physical barriers that you are all familiar with, which have to do with, you know, all those layers of cells that separate one area from another. Okay, so basically, I'm going to show you that we have three main barriers in the general context of things. And the first barrier is, of course, the corneum. We all know that the corneum is the outermost layer of the skin, and it's very important because this layer is the one that's going to actually shield the skin from invaders, right? So what we're actually looking for is to stop invaders and keep the skin healthy. But at the same time, it uses this physical shield to maintain certain things within the skin, which are important to us, especially for the well-being of the cells within all those layers. And in particular, I'm talking about humidity, moisture, right? So it's very important to keep moisture inside the skin. And the corneum helps also to keep the moisture within the skin because there is something on top of it called the acid mantle. And of course, I know you have heard about the acid mantle before, which is part of what makes the skin be protected. And it's very important to keep a healthy acid mantle because that makes the skin able to defend itself against damage. And of course, it makes the skin stay neutral and normal because any alteration to the skin barrier, it's going to cause a problem. So what I want to tell you is basically that if we keep the first skin barrier as healthy as possible, we will also enforce the action of the other barriers, the ones that are within the skin. So we have the second barrier, which is the Rhine blank. This is an electrophysiological barrier. It has to do with ion transmission, right? And this transmission of positive charges or negative charges, right? This is what we call the ions, right? It goes in and out of the skin. But in particular, we have to focus on how negative ions are, let's say, channeled into the skin to reach into the dermis, which is exactly where we want all the products to go to. So knowing that, we know that there is a very particular area which is weak in that second barrier. In that area, it's called the pilosebaceous follicle. The pilosebaceous follicle is, of course, where the hair is born from, right? And you know that as, a pore. That opening on the surface, you see that as a pore, but inside is a little area like a sac that contains the hair. But it also contains other structures which you're also familiar with. That includes, of course, the sebaceous glands. And the sebaceous glands are the ones that help form part of that acid mantle, which you will have on the surface to protect the skin on the outermost exposure. All right. So with that said, we can go even deeper and then find a third skin barrier, which is the dermal epidermal junction, which is created by many layers, about 4, which separate the epidermis from the dermis, correct? So this is very important. I was going to suggest that if you have your microphones on before I continue the class, you please put your microphones on mute, because that way we will not have any of these noises in the recording. Let's say that if your cell phone just goes off, it will be part of the recording. So if you please mute your microphones, then only unmute if you have a question at some point or at the end of the class. Thank you very much. So continuing with this, we know that these barriers will also have an opposition to product penetration. So when we think about cosmetic chemistry, we have to think about how products will enter the skin. So if the barriers are doing their job correctly, right? Then that means certain products that we put inside the skin will not do such a good job. So we need to make sure that the formulations are created so that they can actually get through these layers, because otherwise the products will not do any good to the skin, right? And this is the case with formulations, like certain over-the-counter formulations that you can find in, let's say, skin shops and supermarkets and pharmacies, etc., where you can find all sorts of creams which we know do not have the power to enter the skin. They mostly stay on the outside, and they don't really do much good for the skin. They help the skin feel refreshed, but that's about it. And we really want to get as deep into the skin as we can in order to change the skin for good. All right. So based on knowing that particular information, then we must follow with, other components that are very important for skin absorption of a cosmetic product. And those are the enzymes. These enzymes actually dwell within the skin. And these enzymes have a lot to do with how these products enter the skin and, of course, how they behave, because these enzymes are going to help with metabolism of the components of the formulas of certain skincare products. And so just for you as a reminder, we have 5 enzymes that will regulate product penetration, and this will happen mostly throughout the micro layers of the stratum corneum. And you are very familiar about all the layers of the stratum corneum, so it's very easy to understand that these enzymes are located throughout those layers in order to metabolize components, which could be sugars, could be proteins, could be fats, etc., right? So as you see on the slide, you have enzymes for sugars such as beta-glucocerebrosidase, which will actually help break down any starches in products, right? So if you have a product that contains, like a long chain of carbohydrates for hydration, which carbohydrates are great because they can actually pull water into the skin and they hydrate, let's say a cosmetic um, moisturizer, right? Will have starches in the formula, which will help with absorbing that water into the skin. So in order for that to actually do something for the skin, you're going to have these sugars, right, be present in the formula and then metabolized by the enzymes as they make their way through the skin. In the same way, you're going to have other enzymes like acid phosphatase and chymotrypsin. These enzymes, just like trypsin as well, will break down proteins. So for example, if you think about collagen, if you think about elastin, if you think about, any protein or peptide, right? These enzymes will help with the passage of those components into the skin and will metabolize them and make them easier to also be absorbed. However, in some cases, depending on the active that we are penetrating, we do not want those enzymes to actually break them down. Because if they get broken down too early in the absorption mechanism, they will not reach in the highest concentration down to the bottom of the skin. And so what we want to do in those cases, and for some specific ingredients, we want to make sure we encapsulate those ingredients. And that's why we use delivery systems for certain products. So it's important to really see all these challenges that are presented during the formulation and manufacturing of products so we can actually guarantee that a product can enter the skin, penetrate, and get down to the target area or the target zone, which could be a very specific or particular cell. And for that, you need, of course, other elements, which are receptors, and you need to make sure that the molecules of the actives that you're using are compatible with those receptors. But then, that comes later. That's once the ingredients can make it through these layers of the corneum and either get metabolized or broken down by enzymes or survive, the passing through these layers so that they can actually get to their very specific area of action. We also have phospholipase, which is great for fats, and of course, will also help metabolize those fats in the products. Like, for example, oils, right? So many creams contain oils, even the oils in the emulsions, right? So certain oils will have to be stronger or thicker, and other oils will have to be a little thinner or easier to move through. And that's just an example, of course. There are so many other particular components that we can discuss later. But for now, what's important is to understand that the skin will behave according to its own internal components. So for example, if these enzymes are very active, right, the pH of the skin may vary. And the pH of the skin will vary naturally from surface to bottom. So it will be more acidic at the top and more alkaline at the bottom. And this is normal. So that actually helps to guard off from bacteria, from viruses or microorganisms that can actually hurt the skin or harm it in any way. And this is why we actually have also these components here, which may have a secondary immune function, which is to protect the skin from attacks from the outside. So knowing that these enzymes are present is important as something to consider for formulation. All right, so we'll move on and continue on how these steps should be taken care of. Very quickly here, I just wanted to show you that, of course, because products have to enter the skin in very specific ways, once they do their, initial contact with the skin, right? And they have to break down, their particular structure so that they can be diffused through these layers. Each product, depending on how it is formulated, may have a particular route to take down into the lower layers of the skin. And typical mechanisms, as you can see here, are corneum assimilation, which will be typical of cleansers, for example. With cleansers, when you use a cleanser, most of the actual liquid in the formula, which can be hydrating, can enter through the first layers of the corneum, dragging with it any particular actives that you want to, let's say, place in that formulation to help the skin even during the cleansing process. Because in reality, what happens is that, of course, the cleansing process should be a very quick process that mostly focuses on removing debris, dirt, impurities, and dead cells from the surface of the skin, so you can continue with the treatment. But sometimes cleansers have specific functions that are additional to the cleansing function, which is the main purpose. So in this case, if you have a cleanser that is for sensitive skin, this cleanser will have a formulation that is adapted to still, cleanse the skin. However, it will be soothing, it will calm the skin, and it will be gentle in its actions. So it won't make the skin more irritated or in any way harmed, because it's very important to consider also how we care for the acid mantle and the natural skin barrier that protects the skin. So the corneum assimilation goes for cleansers. Imbibition is a mechanism that goes for toners, as you can see on the picture on the right-hand side on the top, where you see the little tiny arrows entering the cells. So that is mostly a process for toners where most of the liquid enters into the toners. We have intercellular, which is a mechanism that is used for serums and creams, where all these ingredients go through the layers and in between the cells through intercellular spaces, right? And of course, for that matter, you have to have specific ingredients which are, very small, that have to have a size and compatibility with the environment that allows them to go through those layers or through those spaces, to say it in a better way, right? So that's important to consider. Then you have the transfollicular absorption, which is, as you can see on the bottom right, that hair follicle that is depicted there. The transfollicular is basically how a product enters the skin through a pore, through a hair follicle. So what happens there really is very simple. You will have a product that, if the actual opening or the pore in that hair follicle is unobstructed, or let's say open, completely open because it's clean, you will have about 80% of absorption of the product through that area. And this is very important because we sometimes do not consider how important clean pores are. If pores are obstructed by dead cells, makeup, or even fatty accumulations like hardened sebum, that is going to cause the hair follicle to create an obstacle to absorption, and that is going to make us waste a lot of benefit from the product we're applying to our skin. So this is the reason why exfoliation previous to a treatment may be really important, especially for certain skin types. Like we have acne skin types, oily skin types and very mature skin types that have been damaged by the sun, and also for women who use a lot of makeup, right? Who wear a lot of makeup. So those are the cases in particular. Of course, for everyone, it would be necessary, but not so much for very young people unless their pores are very obstructed or congested. We want to keep those pores clean so that we do not waste any product and we get the most out of the, treatment that we're doing. And on top of that, we had one more that was transcutaneous, which is going through all the layers, especially pushed by a device. So when you use any type of machine in your practice and you push an ingredient into the skin with that machine, what you're doing is transcutaneous absorption. And so you can use galvanic, you can use high frequency, you can use radio frequency, you could use, all sorts of currents, etc. So even ultrasound can help you penetrate products, and that would be a transcutaneous type of absorption. But the important thing is to really mind where these ingredients are going. If you look at this picture, you will see that there are certain target zones, and these are only examples, of course, but we want the most important actives to reach as deep as possible, because when those actives reach the dermal epidermal junction, which is where the epidermis and the dermis meet, that's where you will have transportation of those actives into the dermis, which will help with new skin being formed. And this is important because this is part of a rejuvenation process. You really want to, stimulate the dermis in the long run. Because if you just do the epidermis, it will help with the outer look of the skin. It will make the skin look smoother, and yes, it will look nicer, but the epidermis is just a covering for the dermis, and the dermis is the true skin. That's where your collagen, where your elastin, where your hyaluronic acid is. So this is why it's so important to really think about feeding the dermis. And we cannot do it directly because, of course, we have a layer on top of it, which is the epidermis. So this is why it's so important to take care of the epidermis and nourish the epidermis, but consider the focus to be getting down there to the dermis. Of course, if you have injectables, you get really close to the dermis, or actually within the dermis. But if you don't, and you're using only, skincare products, you can get to the dermis indirectly as you go through the epidermis. So looking at this picture, you see where UV filters actually stay, which is on the top of the skin, on top of the epidermis. And then you can see how AHAs, or alpha hydroxy acids, will actually do their job mostly, and especially when we want to exfoliate. So AHAs that work as exfoliants will work on the top layers right under the corneum, most likely. So they will take the corneum and part of the layers underneath the corneum, which are still close to the surface. And this is how you will have a very smooth surface that will also help with product absorption. Then you can see hyaluronic acid a little deeper, and then you can see moisturizing agents going even deeper as well. And hyaluronic acid, depending on the type of formulation, if you talk about something very fragmented, very small, that's going to penetrate through different levels and go even deeper into the dermis if you use it very, very finely fragmented. But you can see that the most active ingredients need to reach deep down into the very active layer of the epidermis, which is the basal cell layer. That's where you can see down there the retinol and the vitamin C. So all those actives need to get down to that particular area, because that's where you both stimulate the epidermis to renew and where you also like knock on the door for going into the dermis. So that area is very fundamental. That's where you will actually be in the best place to stimulate both layers, the epidermis and the dermis. And going from there, of course, the products will do an amazing job as long as you have everything under control and you're using a very active product. So before I move into the actual formulation, I wanted to show you a little bit of why and how cosmetics are classified and where you can find some differences. And this is important. So I'm just going to go very quickly over this section because it's mostly, information that you may already know, but it's good as a reminder that not all cosmetics or products that we use in skincare are created equal. There are lots of differences depending on their approach, depending on their purpose, and depending on their own limitations. So cosmetics in general are all articles that we put on the surface of the skin, right? And that work to really help improve the look of the skin, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, altering the appearance, etc. They're not really meant from the standpoint of the definition to change the structure of the skin. However, because we are moving into a more clinical approach to using products and helping the skin, this definition may appear outdated. And this is important because every day we're moving closer. And when I say we are moving, I mean the entire industry. It's getting closer and closer to make that distinction between, cosmetic and more clinical or medical products. That line that, let's say, defines the difference is getting thinner and thinner every time because, cosmetic products are getting better at what they're doing because of all the available technologies. So this is important to consider because that will determine how you want to address a skin with a particular treatment. So in general, we have a classification that has withstood the passage of time. And this is, how we know if a product is effective or what is the reach of that effectiveness. So we have products that are for mass use, or let's say for the general population. Those are the over the counter products, right? What you find in shops and stores at the mall, those are over the counter products. You can put in that classification, the typical moisturizers that are made for face, for body, everywhere, that have nice scents, etc. And there are, of course, many, many different qualities when we talk about that. But then also you have your makeup, you have everything that you put on the surface of the skin, and which is easy to help make the skin feel better at that moment. But then when you start moving into higher effectiveness or higher quality, then you go into high quality skincare called cosmeceutical products, right? Cosmeceutical products, of course, are products that give you better results than an over-the-counter product. They have faster action. They have very few side effects. They are, very professional in their manufacturing. However, they're not yet at the level of a pharmaceutical, type of product, which is a prescription. Those are the ones that will be given by a doctor. You see, for example, we have the case of retinol. Retinol is vitamin A. You can find vitamin A everywhere, right? Everybody knows that you go to anywhere, you find retinol. Retinol is easy to find. However, you will know that that retinol is not the same in quality and effectiveness depending where it comes from. So you want to make sure that that retinol is in a good concentration and that it is, as natural as possible, and that of course is protected in the formulation, etc. So you can't compare retinol in an over-the-counter product, which will be at a low concentration, and try to compare with a cosmeceutical retinol from a skincare company, which will have it at a much better concentration and delivery system. Of course, if we talk about a doctor prescription, they may not prescribe retinol unless there is a very specific retinol formula, but they will prescribe something harder or stronger to resist oxidation and all many things, specifically those that have to do with going into the skin and stimulating the skin very quickly. So we're talking about, for example, tretinoin. Tretinoin is a form of vitamin A that is much more active, right? And which can be more irritating, can have certain side effects because of irritation, right? And may even be classified as a drug in certain countries. And of course, you even have, an oral presentation of vitamin A, which is isotretinoin, right? Which is hardly used nowadays because there are so many other options to help, for example, acne that is very strong and that has left scarring on someone's face, or, that makes, the acne process a very complicated one. So what I wanted to show you with this is that we have pros and that we have cons to every product that exists. All right. And mostly this is a US type of look, but that also applies international. So we have over-the-counter cosmeceutical, which is like a skincare products from companies. You have pharmaceutical, which is what drug or formulation made by a doctor or for a doctor administration. And then we have the oral components that help also for skin rejuvenation, that are what we call nutraceuticals. These are supplements, right? These supplements are, for example, collagen tablets that people take in the morning, or hyaluronic acid capsules that people take at some point, right? So those also help the skin more indirectly and in a systemic way. And usually nutraceuticals are not very regulated, so many of those are not so effective as to grant the need for purchasing them or using them. As a matter of fact, you have to be very careful when you buy nutraceutical supplements for the skin, because they can contain heavy metals. They can contain contaminants that you don't want to put into your body. So that's why it's important to go with a very respected brand, right? This is important to consider. And also the one that will show you clinical results, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, all these have to do with skin, and they may or may not complement each other. So if you're taking, let's say if you're applying a cosmeceutical skincare product or recommending a cosmeceutical skincare product for your guests or clients, you can also recommend a nutraceutical if you believe there's one that is worth it, right? Or vitamin, like vitamin C, vitamin A, of course, I do recommend some of those for the ones with a lack of supplementation in their eating habits, right? You sometimes need the vitamin C or the vitamin D, etc. So they will also help the skin, and I will call them complementary, which is important because they can help improve the skin condition. So I'm showing you here a very long list of typical cosmeceutical ingredients, which are actives used in these cosmeceutical formulations from skincare companies. Of course, I'm not going to go through them. I'm just showing you that there are many of which are classified according to their purpose what they do, and mostly their source. Because of course, you want to always think about the source of an ingredient. And this is important as far as like if the ingredient is synthetic or if the ingredient is natural. And so we at Pavonia believe that natural is better, right? However, in the worldwide industry, synthetic also dominates, and that's important to know because sometimes you buy a product thinking it is natural, but it has a lot of synthetic ingredients mixed with the natural ingredients. And that has to do with the sourcing of the ingredient. And there are several reasons why companies would do that, of course, many of which have to do with costs and preservation, etc. But we believe that the most natural, the better for your skin. And so we believe in botanical, we believe in minerals that come from earth, etc. Anything that is coming from nature, we put in the Pavonia formulas. So throughout this class, you will see where we use Pavonia and where the industry is and what they use in general, so that by the end of this class, you can really understand a label for an ingredient. Because my purpose is that not only you understand cosmetic chemistry, at least on the surface, because it's of course something that requires a lot of reading and understanding, but I would love to see if you are able to read confidently a label for a product anywhere and actually say this is a good product or this is not so good a product, right? So that's why I am going to focus on that, closing, the end of this class. So let's talk about the challenges in product formulation and what that means. Basically, creating a product is like designing something. It's like building something with a lot of care. So you have to create a product according to the purpose. If you want an anti-aging cream, if you want let's say a soothing product or a soothing serum for irritated skin, or if you want to create a peel, right? A chemical peel because you want to exfoliate or because you want to rejuvenate the surface of the skin. So all these particular factors will focus or let's say target specific areas based on what we have available for ourselves to put in the formula. So you have to look at the actives you're going to use. You have to look at the delivery vehicles you're going to use. And that case, for example, is that of encapsulation, which I know you are familiar with encapsulation in products. Everybody at least knows what a liposome is or liposome, right? Now, also important to know if the product is going to have appealing physical characteristics. Like, for example, is it going to feel tacky? Is it going to feel slimy? Is it going to feel silky? Is it going to feel thick or thin or runny? All those things are important to consider when it comes to designing a product. And of course, the presentation and the packaging, which we will also see at the closer to the end of this class, and the shelf life. The shelf life is very important because that determines how long a product will last. So what I'm going to show you here is, even though I have a picture of a Pavonia cream, what I'm showing you here on the text is industry-wide. So that means this is what most companies would do. So you're going to choose a base or emulsion type. You're going to choose your active and inactive ingredients because in every product you have ingredients that are meant to create a change or do something for the skin, and ingredients that are meant to support the action of those ingredients, which will also help the formula to stay, stable. And those are what we call inactive ingredients. Sometimes in the industry lingo, those inactive ingredients are called, and I would say not in a good way, but they're called fillers, right? Like fillers in a formula, fillers in a cream, but they're not necessarily fillers as in like they shouldn't be there. I mean, every ingredient in a product has a meaning and a reason to be there, everyone. However, some of them could be better in certain formulas. So instead of using a very cheap or not so good ingredient, you could always have something that really helps the skin, even if that means that the product will be a little more expensive because you chose the better ingredient, right? So also consider the carriers, the delivery systems, the preservatives. Also very important. A product will not last for a very long time, especially when you're using natural ingredients, right? And certain emulsions that, of course, if they contain oil, they will have to be preserved because the oils are going to turn rancid over time unless you put that in a vacuum. So that's impossible to do unless it's the packaging that allows you to give that vacuum the protective effect. But those types of packaging are not very common, and they exist, but they make sometimes the product a little more expensive in some situations, but they will not 100% ensure that the product will not deteriorate. They may make the product less able to contaminate and less dependent on preservatives. But it all depends on what kind of preservative you use and why you use it, right? So we'll discuss that later because it's important when reading labels. So another thing to consider is the pH, the concentration, the scent, the color, and the texture of a product. So the first thing that we need to see here is what is an emulsion. And what we need to understand is that the emulsion is the core or the heart of every product in skincare that is in a liquid form or in a fluid form. Because, of course, unless you have a product that is only water, then you do not have an emulsion. Because for you to have an emulsion, you have to have a mixture of water and oils, right? And that mixture needs to be a stable mixture, right? Which means you have to put something that makes the water and the oil to stay together in peace within that formula. So what I'm trying to say is that an emulsion is the state at which incompatible ingredients such as water and oil stay compatible or stay together, right? And so it's how you create stability and you allow two incompatible ingredients or agents to remain together even when they don't want to. So you need something in the middle that helps them come together. And that is the emulsifier or surfactant, which we will see in a moment. But I just wanted to show you that the base of every product in skincare, like a cream, for example, which is not only water-based, is, of course, an emulsion. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, an oil-based only product will not be an emulsion either, right? So you have to have the water and the oil together. As you can see here, these are the basic components of an emulsion. You have the water phase, the oil phase, and the emulsifiers. You have the humectants, you have the extracts. Colorants are not actives, are ingredients that we put in products to make the products have a distinctive color that makes the product appealing or that leads the person to understand the purpose or the origin of that product. However, we at Pavonia do not believe that the need for synthetic dyes or colors are necessary. You will see that many products in the industry use synthetic dyes. Like, for example, to make it super easy, lipstick for women. Lipstick uses synthetic dyes or colors to achieve that particular shade that you like and that you will put on your mouth, right, on your lips. So at Pavonia, the only colors that we use come from natural minerals that in nature they present that color. So we use usually pigments that come from minerals like iron oxide, which you can have in several variations of shades. So you can have from very dark to very light. And that way you can play around with natural colors. So you don't have to resource, to getting these synthetic dyes, which are not the best. Then you have thickeners, which are important for the texture of a product. Um, and that would be part of the water phase. Then the oil phase will be all hydrophobic materials like oils, esters, fragrances. And that's something that I'm making here also a distinctive word, because fragrances are basically, when you add a synthetic aroma to a product. So that's what it's called, a fragrance. Because normally in Pavonia, we do not use fragrances. We use the natural smells or the natural aromas that come from the ingredients. So if a cream smells like orange or like citrus, it's because it contains the essential oil of citrus, right? Or the essential oil of orange. So we're not going to use any synthetic scent or aroma like it happens in many cases in the industry with many products that you see out there. All right. So, and that is important to make a distinction about. We also have emulsifiers, which are the agents that hold the water and oil together, and we already mentioned those. So remember this, an emulsion is a compound of water, oil, and an emulsifier. And the examples here is what goes in each phase. Now, why am I saying phase? The reason why I'm saying this is because when you create an emulsion, you have to separate the water components from the oil components and prepare those separately before you can mix them together with the emulsifier. So you will see that later, because I'm going to show you how we do the preparation of the stem cell screen in Pavonia. So I'll show you the process of the stem cell screen in particular. So what are the features of the water phase? The water phase is very important because it's the most abundant component in a product that is an emulsion. Usually when we talk about like a cleanser, a toner, creams, lotions, etc. So of course the water is the solvent, what in chemistry we'll call the solvent. So it's the medium into which a solute or an actual active it's going to dissolve into, right? So basically, anything that you add to water will either mix with the water, dissolve in the water, or float and be suspended in the water. All right, so this is why it's important to understand the purpose of water in a product. But it's got to be water that is absolutely pure, perfectly sterilized, perfectly free of minerals, chemicals, microorganisms, foreign particles, or residues. This is very important because if this water is not absolutely pure, then you may have interactions with other ingredients in the formula, and you don't want that. As a matter of fact, this water should not have any type of interaction with any ions that are added to the formula, right? So this is important so that the water itself helps to carry, but does not interact with those actives. So the water, of course, will also provide hydration, among other benefits, and we know that. So as you can see here, all ingredients that are hydrosoluble, meaning that can dissolve in the water, will be present during the manufacturing of the water phase of the emulsion. So we have hydrolyzed proteins, whether they're micronized or not, like collagen, elastin. Those are proteins that are going to be put in the water phase. All right. We're going to have minerals, humectants like glycerin, which comes from sugar. Other sugars, of course, will have pigments or dyes for the industry. We don't use any dyes. We use natural pigments. Thickeners like carbomer, gums, cellulose, etc. These thickeners, which you can call fillers, right? They're inactive ingredients that are part of the formula, but that help the formula achieve a consistency. So these are still natural. They're not from synthetic origin because these simply give the emulsion a body you can feel. All right, so they're important in the creation of the emulsion. If not, it would be just liquid that will run everywhere and it will not stay on the skin as you want it. Then you have acids like, not hyaluronic acid because it wouldn't be a perfect example. I mean, like when you have glycolic, when you have salicylic, those are like more known as alpha hydroxy acids that are going to do that particular job, that will have a pH that can be varied to do different functions, whether it is hydration or exfoliation. You have also alcohols, which in Pavonia, we do not use any synthetic alcohol. We use only natural alcohols that come from fermentation. Like if you leave a grape to ferment, it will turn into wine, right? And that's exactly how Pavonia uses certain alcohols for the purpose of the manufacturing. But those are natural alcohols that do not have the drying effect of a synthetic alcohol. This is why it's important to differentiate it. That's why I put these in red to call your attention, to make you pay attention to what I'm saying here, because it's important to differentiate from what Pavonia does normally. And then, of course, preservatives, which can be, anything like parabens, which we don't use and which are now having a bad reputation for a few years. So basically, you can have preservatives that are of natural origin, which what they do is basically make sure the formula does not get contaminated too quickly. In Pavonia, what we use is mostly sugar extracts that will keep the formula from degrading too fast, so that we can guarantee that 3-year shelf life from the moment of manufacturing. All right, so that's how they work. In many other companies, they do use synthetic preservatives because they're very strong and they make the product last a longer time perhaps, but then you're introducing into your body synthetic ingredients that you may not want to have. So that's important to also consider. Now, looking at the oil phase, what we have here that oils are excellent materials that help the skin feel smoother. They help to protect the skin because they keep water inside the skin, so they create this layer of shielding, right? They reduce static. They make the skin look healthy, etc. And of course, make the product to run easily on the surface of the skin. However, oils have problems because oils can go bad very quickly and give a very bad smell to the product. You may have had a product that is old at some point in your cabinet, and that product smelled rancid, smelled like old, and that's because of the oils in the formula, because they quickly deteriorate. So you have to have a very high quality oil, of course, and on top of that, you may need to add preservatives that are natural to make sure that that oil lasts longer. All right. One problem with the oils is that they do not mix with water. So this is where the emulsifier comes to play. And the emulsifier needs to be put in that formula to create that bond between the water and the oil naturally. All right. So how do you identify oils in a product? Well, what you will be looking after is essential oils, right? Which are basically alcohols, but they have this particular concentration that makes them feel like an oil, but they're alcohol, so they're not real oils. The oils that you're looking after are, waxes, silicone, esters, lanolin, etc. Of course, I put those in red on this list because we don't use those with Bevonia. Bevonia does use silicone and derivatives, but the silicone that we use is not the silicone that you know in the industry. No, it is a derivative from silica, from natural silica mineral, right? Which comes from earth, and that produces what we call dimethicone and cyclomethicone, right? We use those to improve the surface feel of a product and to help the product run easier and get absorbed easier within the skin. However, they are classified in chemistry because of their nature and because of how they are molecularly structured. They are classified as a silicone, all right? But they're not the silicones that that you would use in a machine, right? That you would use in, the typical implants that people used to have in the past and fillers of the past. No, has nothing to do with those silicones. And there are industrial silicones that you use to give shine to products and furniture and things like that. No, has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with that. As I'm saying, it's all about how a product is classified. Same as organic and inorganic and natural. So the way that these are names that are used in the industry, you have to be very careful at understanding what these ingredients actually do and why they're called that way, because there are classifications according to structure in chemistry that will make a specific ingredient called something else or something specific. So that's what I'm trying to make sure I explain to you, so you see why. If you see dimethicone or cyclomethicone in Pavonia formulations, which are very few, very few, they are not going to really enter the skin. They're not actually the bad silicones. They're just called, categorized as silicones. All right. Now, we have other things to understand here, which is why water and oil does not, mix well. And the basic concept here is that water is polar, which means it has ions, right? And that ion means there is a charge. And these charges is what keeps the water together. All right, so this is why the water is structured as a liquid that when you put two drops of water together, they're joining immediately, right? Because they are molecules that are attracted by electrostatic forces that are called van der Waals forces, right? And of course, these van der Waals forces are the ones that we break when we start heating up the water. And this is what you see as escaping in the form of steam when we boil water. So basically, you break those bonds, those van der Waals forces. There are bonds that exist between the water molecules. And then, of course, that's when the water changes into steam or water vapor that goes away. And this is what happens when you heat up the water. The opposite is true as well, which means when you make water go freezing, when you cool the water to a freezing point, those van der Waals forces get much, much stronger and harder, and this is why water solidifies and becomes ice, right? Which, of course, if you feel the texture and strength of ice, is very strong. Ice can be as strong as rock, right? So this is why it's important to understand what happens in the physics of these ingredients and why they are used in the manner they are utilized in formulations. On the other end, oils are nonpolar. Oils basically are substances that contain no charges. Remember that polarity, polar means that is related to polarity. So you have to have positive or negative charges, right? So in this case, oils do not have charges, and that's why they are pretty much rejected by the water, and at the same time, they do reject water themselves. So they don't stay mixed very easily. What oils do is bond through clumping, but that is easy to break if you put something in between, which of course, in this case, would be an emulsifier. All right, so what is an emulsifier agent? An emulsifier agent is simply an agent that goes in the middle of the water and the oil phase to make them come together. That's it. That's the simplest way of saying it. That's the simplest way of explaining it. And so up to now, it has seemed like it could be difficult to understand, but it's not. It really is very simple. You are going to put these molecules together through an emulsifying agent. And this emulsifying agent, it's going to be what it's also known as a surfactant. Of course, surfactants are agents that break surface tension, which at the same time can be classified in many ways depending on their purpose. We're going to see that. Now, with this picture, of course, you can think of something else, but it's not that. What I'm meaning here is that we have the rendition of an emulsifier agent. What you see here is basically an emulsifier agent with a lipophilic tail and a hydrophilic head. The hydrophilic head of the emulsifier agent, it's going to stick into the water phase. And the lipophilic tail, it's going to stick into the oil phase. So if you see the circle on the right-hand side, you will notice that the little tails are embedded into the oil drop, and the heads are embedded into the water area. And the reason for this is because they act like a screw that you put into two different areas that you want to join together. All right. This just happens naturally when you use an emulsifier. And that's all you need. That particular element that joins both. And that's exactly what we have in an emulsion. So as you see here, emulsifiers are a type of surfactant that help to reduce surface tension. And of course, they help to disperse the oil in water. So when you have at the restaurant, for example, oil and vinegar, what happens? If you put vinegar and oil and you mix it for a little while, right, together, they will seem like they're becoming one solution. But if you just let them sit there for a while, they will separate. You will see the oil going to a different place than the vinegar goes. So this is why you need an emulsifier, which could be a little bit of milk. If you used a drop of milk in that connection between the oil and the vinegar, you will actually create an emulsion. And it's not necessary to go anywhere further. Of course, any cream that you use is an actual emulsion, but also mayonnaise that you eat is an emulsion where you have water and you have oils, but they are stable in that thick, whitish consistency that you know as mayonnaise, right? So that's a very easy example to follow. So now, with that said, basically, the surface tension is what has to do with cohesive forces, right? So as we noticed before with the picture of the water molecules, right? They have very strong bonds. That means they stick together very solidly. But when you use a surfactant, you actually lower that surface tension and you help to eliminate or alter that bonding that exists between molecules. So one example of that is soap. All right. So soap is a surfactant that helps to remove fats. So what a soap ingredient does is to break that surface tension or lower it, and of course separate the elements of the emulsion. So if the emulsion comes together with an emulsifier, what soap does is basically break away that bonding that was created with the emulsifier and allow it to rinse easily, dragging all the impurities that you have on your skin. That's why people use soap, right? To remove impurities. But we'll talk about soap in a moment. It's important to really focus now on the types of surfactants that we have in the industry. So we have those with a negative charge, we have those with a positive charge, we have those that have both charges, and those without charges. So the ones with a negative charge are called anionic, right? And for example, soap is an anionic surfactant. What I want you to remember or take away from this class is that you have emulsifiers, call them surfactants, call them emulsifiers, whichever way you want to call them, that have specific purposes. The negative emulsifiers cause foaming. So when you actually see, for example, a cleanser that foams, that creates foam, or soap which creates foam, or any product by that matter that creates foam, it contains an emulsifier which has a negative charge. Typical ones are in the industry, like sodium lauryl sulfate, etc., which we don't like because they're very drying and very damaging to the skin. But there are others that are better that can also cause foaming, like olefin sulfonate, saponaria, etc. Those are, the type of surfactants that can help create foam, all right, or emulsifiers that create foam. Now, we have the ones with the positive charge. The ones with the positive charge, we get those that are antiseptic or conditioning, so they can help the skin in specific ways. For example, when you take a shower and you wash your hair, right, with shampoo, you're going to use a negative surfactant in the shampoo. So it creates the foam, which we also call the lather, right, when that foam becomes thicker, right, and creamier. So you're using a negative surfactant first in your cleansing process. But normally, if you leave your hair rinsed after a negative surfactant, it will be very dry because all the fats are going to come out with the foam. So you need to condition that hair by restoring certain lipids and helping the dryness ease away. And that's why you may want to use a positive surfactant after. In the case of getting in the shower and washing your hair, right? You will naturally want to use a conditioner after. Some people don't. They don't just because they feel their hair is very greasy or whatnot, but that depends on the conditioner formula. However, what I'm saying is that in general, you may want to use a hair rinse after shampoo because you're going to use a positive surfactant or a positive emulsifier that's going to give the hair the conditioning effect that you're looking for. All right? And that's just an example, of course. Then we have the amphoteric, which are the surfactants with positive and negative charges at the same time. And that is one case, for example, the phospholipids, lecithin. Where you see soy lecithin, it means that you're using a surfactant that has positive and negative charges because it's going to be important for that ingredient to be embedded in a formula where stability is very necessary. So you will have an ingredient that will stay stable in the emulsion and remain stable throughout the entire use of that product, right? Especially for those that tend to break away very easily. So phospholipids, lecithin, etc., those are amphoteric. And also amphoteric actives are very good when it comes to penetration into the skin because you can use, for example, a machine like galvanic current or any electrical machines to push the negative charges of the products right into the skin and then the positive charges after. So you make sure all the molecules enter the skin completely and as deep as possible into the skin. So this is important to consider. And then finally, the non-ionic, which are the ones without charges. In this case, are also for stabilization, for emulsification, etc. We have alcohols, we have esters, etc. So those are for you to understand what is there in the industry. So getting back to the soap story, basically what soap does is entrap, all the particles that are embedded or suspended in the water, right? And remove them away when you rinse. So soap will actually break that surface tension that we meant before, and then of course help remove attached oils, attached impurities, dead cells, etc. from the skin to cleanse the skin, right? But some soaps can be very harsh because they can also dry the skin, just like I mentioned before, right? Anything that foams may have a tendency to dry the skin out a little bit. But depending on another factor, which is called the pH, if the pH of that particular product is too high, what we call alkaline, then the drying effect will be much, much worse. Soap, usually, unless it's a specific pH balance soap in general from over the counter will be very harsh on the skin after a while because it will actually create a state of dryness that will break the skin barrier and make the skin sensitized. Many people experienced that at the beginning and throughout now the pandemic because everybody was washing their hands with soap and water very often. The problem is that they never put a cream back on their skins after doing so. Some people did, right? But those who didn't, especially men, what happened? They started to have problems with their hands, very dry hands that started to crack and allowing the skin to open to foreign matters, right? Especially bacteria, fungi, and other viruses. So it's important to understand that very foaming ingredients or ingredients with a high pH can damage the skin barrier and dry the skin terribly. So I'm going to move into formulation now. And what I'm going to say is that this particular list of industry emulsifiers are the ones that you will see mostly in products throughout the market. So if you go to a store and you grab a product and read the label, you will find these ingredients as emulsifiers. You can identify them as emulsifiers, okay? However, not all these emulsifiers are good, right? They're not necessarily skin friendly. Some of these are synthetic. Some of these are very drying. Some of these can irritate the skin. So you have to consider where the actual emulsifier comes from. If the emulsifier is from natural origin, that's fine. And you can have the same name for a synthetic or for a natural ingredient. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, as with the case of silicones, right? It's how they're classified because of the structure that they possess. But if you find out that something comes from nature versus synthetic, it's not from oil, because that's the distinction. Silicone classified from silica from nature versus silicone classified as an oil from synthetic petroleum, or manipulation of petroleum or other oils man-made in the lab, right? So this is what is important to consider and understand. Same as with mineral oil and that kind of stuff that you can find in some products which are not pure. So with that said, always choose the right choice. So going natural is better than going synthetic, but I understand that in some cases it would be very difficult to go fully natural when the natural option does not exist. And so people will have to, resort with a synthetic form. At Pavonia, if we cannot get it from nature, then it will not be put in the product as an alternative from a synthetic source. So that's just simply not in our philosophy. We will always do what's best for the skin, and not necessarily this is what other companies want to do. They just want to make sure they deliver a product that works, but regardless of how the ingredients are sourced. So that you must take into consideration. So in order to understand formulation in general, you have to understand now the types of emulsions. We're going to go fast over this because this is not so complicated. Really, this is just, understanding the difference between a simple emulsion and a multiple emulsion, and the size of the emulsion, which is also important. All right. So what I'm going to show you here is that you have in the industry emulsions that are of a simple kind and of the multiple kind. The simple kind are the ones that you probably are most familiar with because you studied, skincare, knowing about those emulsions, the oil in water and the water in oil. If you went through school, you know that this is very typical and it's explained throughout, right? Then you have the multiple emulsions, which are, the triple emulsions as we see here, water, oil, water, or the oil, water, oil. All right, so we're going to focus on the differences between these emulsions. So the simple oil in water that it's mostly everywhere and that is used, for the nice feeling, the cooling effect, the hydrating feeling, etc. It's limited because it doesn't allow the skin to really get good benefit from the oil contained within the emulsion. So what you have is a simple two-phase emulsion, water and oil, and that's it. It doesn't really protect the skin on the surface. It's not the best for dry skin. So if you are going through a winter right now, of course, then you will notice that your skin needs more lipids during the cold weather. Yes, you need hydration, but you need the hydration to be trapped under the cover of a lipid. If not, your skin will evaporate that water in seconds, and then basically you're back to getting dry skin and skin that can actually feel really, really tight and break, which is really bad. On the other hand, we have the water in oil. The water in oil is the opposite, but again, the problem is that it can irritate the skin because it's got too much oil. You should not use this on oily skins or acne because they will clog the pores. Yet they're good for dry skin. So the problem is that you have limitations and specific uses. So you have to have both at some point in different products in order to address specific skin concerns. So how do you solve this problem? This problem has been solved for a long time through the use of multiple emulsions, which is one emulsion that bears both phases, the water and the oil, at the same time. However, you have it in a way that you enhance one phase over the other. So what I'm trying to say is that you have the water, oil, water, where you have more predominance of water and less of oil, but yet enough oil that contains water to hydrate the inner parts of the skin. But you also have more protective triple emulsions such as oil and water and oil, which are used for the repair of damaged skin, like very sensitive skins, very hyperreactive skins, skins that come from procedures such as lasers, microneedling, etc. Those are the types of emulsions that work best, right? To recover damaged or broken skin, the oil, water, oil, right? So we have water, oil in water, and oil, water in oil. The advantages are that, of course, you have everything you need in one emulsion and that they are very stable and will last longer than simple emulsions. Simple emulsions separate very quickly and you will see the oil floating on top of the cream. And of course, that rancid smell when they go bad. Um, Triple emulsions are more resistant to this. They will stick together for longer. They will not separate as easily. Of course, they can separate. I mean, every emulsion in the world will break at some point if they're heated or if they're too old. But in general, these emulsions can last longer if they're multiple. These are also called triphase, all right? Because there are three phases in them, the water, the oil, and the water again, or the opposite, oil, water, oil. So triphase. As you can see here, that is a representation of the difference between the simple and the triphase. The simple on the left side, which is only two phases, and the triphase on the right side, which contains additional water to be delivered deeply into the skin when the product is entering the skin. So you get more hydration and better cell function with a triphase. And not to mention that if you put actives inside that extra layer of water inside the oil, then you will have that act as a carrier without the need for added encapsulation. So you see what I'm saying? This is always an advantage. So these are, benefits or differences between one and the other. I'm not going to go through those because I already mentioned them, but you can figure it out. Of course, remember this class will be available as a, rewatch on your end when I share it with Cecilia. So you could actually go through all these steps later on again if you're missing anything or if you're taking notes. But basically, I'm trying to talk about everything that is on the slide so you don't have to really read so much and just focus on what I'm saying. All right. So another thing that we have to mention very quickly is the biomimetic capability of an emulsion. So basically, biomimetic emulsions are emulsions that are fully compatible with the skin and absorb immediately. And the reason why they're fully compatible is because they are similar to the structure of the skin. In particular, the structure and composition of the stratum corneum, which is the first layer that you're going to come in contact with when a product is applied to the surface of the skin. And in order to achieve that, you need to use certain ingredients which are going to help with that capability of biomimetics. So, as you can see, this is a type of emulsion that is more typical of the oil, water, oil emulsion that I mentioned earlier. As you see here, the oil and water and oil combine into a triple emulsion that is oil, water, oil. So you have two phases of oil and one phase of water. The advantage of this, as I said, is that you will have more protective lipids to help repair skin that has been broken, damaged, or that needs to be healed quickly. So it's skin that needs to heal after a procedure, skin that needs to heal after trauma, right? So it doesn't mean that the other emotions, the other multiple emotions don't work. Of course they do, but they take a little longer, but it's the same. I mean, they will in the end provide similar benefits. This is just a step up to accelerate recovery and in some cases to improve the way the product works with very aged skin, you see, with advanced aging. So when we look at all this, we can think, oh, wow, tri-phase emulsions are great. They actually appear to be very beneficial. But did you know that tri-phase microemulsions are even greater? So what are we talking about here? Microemulsions. So it's not just having a tri-phase, not just having water, oil, water. We're talking about, you know, water, oil, water, or oil, water, oil, but at a very small molecular size, right? So what we're going to do here is basically take that triphase and make it so minute, so small that every little component of that emulsion is carried into the skin without any effort. All right. So basically, we are going to show you, or I am going to show you, the triphase microemulsion creation, right? Which depends on what we're doing in the first steps. So we're going to actually create, the microemulsion with the water phase, the oil phase, and the emulsifiers. And we're going to prepare each stage of this process separately until we can put them together, right? And this is how we will create the initial emulsion. So first, we're going to have the creation of the triphase, which of course, I have not mentioned it to you yet. I am just telling you that there are triple emulsions like water, or oil, water, oil. But how do you get to that, right? So you get to that through a first step called the double emulsification. And the double emulsification is a process that is performed in two stages. The first stage is when you take a water and oil, right? That comes from, the emulsion resulting from high shear mixing of water phase and oil phase with a lipophilic surfactant, right? So you use a surfactant that has more affinity with the oil, right? And then you take it and put it into a machine that actually steers the formula at high speed with high shear, which will break it down and make it together at once, creating a water and oil emulsion. Then, of course, we are going to create the WOW, or the WOW, which is water, oil, well, coming from the low shear mixing of the first emulsion that we just prepared with a hydrophilic surfactant. So to make this easier to understand, once we prepare the first water in oil emulsion, we are now going to get that emulsion, add a hydrophilic surfactant to it, because in the first step we used a lipophilic surfactant. Now we're going to use a hydrophilic surfactant, and then we're going to do a low shear emulsification. And when we do that low shear emulsification, we are going to achieve the triple emulsion, which is called the triphase. All right. So this is how we do the triphase in the first place. After we have that, what we have achieved is a regular triphase emulsion, but we want to make it a microemulsion, right? So this is what you see under the microscope for a triphase emulsion. You can see the oil, you can see the water represented, the outside, the inside, the bubbles that you see inside the darker round shape, which is represented as oil. Those bubbles inside are the water inside the oil. And then you can see the water outside. So that's how it looks under the microscope. But this is just an emulsion. What we want to do is create a microemulsion. So in order to create a microemulsion, we're going to go through another step, which is the PIT, or phase inversion temperature process. And this phase inversion temperature process, what it does is heat the microemulsion and then cool it down. When the emulsion cools down, it inverts itself, and in that inversion process, right, which means changing from wow to OWO, right, and then back to wow when it is very cool, that resulting wow or triple or triphase emulsion is no longer an emulsion. It's actually a microemulsion because of the physical change that is produced by the heat, right? In this case, there are many ways you can actually achieve a microemulsion. This is just one of them. This is the one that Pavonia uses, right? So through PIT, you actually obtain a triphase microemulsion. And when you have that, you're not ready yet. You still have to take it up to a third step, which is homogenization. And with homogenization, you put this into a very big container that will turn at high speed and homogenize the formula, the base, right? The emulsion, in this case, a microemulsion, and will subject it to high pressure, right? Hydraulic pressure. And with the shear blades, that are going at high speed, it's going to break down every single particle of this microemulsion into a very even and homogeneous, size that will have a better dispersion for later on when you put it on the skin. So this is a step that refines the triphase microemulsion to a silky texture. So this is how you get from the actual emulsion components on the outside to creating a refined, silky microemulsion triphase texture that goes into the skin. I think it's just fascinating, right? And it just feels nice, feels good. So as you see here, this is the resulting effect under the homogenization process, where before homogenization, some particles, as those squares that you see there, which are crystals, right, are going to basically break down into very even particles, as you can see here after homogenization. Everything's going to be the same size, and everything's going to flow much, much better into the skin without any problems. And that's exactly what we are trying to do, right? So Pavonia does all this for the improvement of how the formula will be absorbed into the skin. And of course, knowing that microemulsion particles are smaller than emulsion particles, as you can see on this picture, you will understand what I'm trying to say, which is basically that these microstructures will have a better affinity with the corneum lipids and, of course, penetrate easier. And this is exactly what we want to do. We want to increase the absorbency because the particles are small enough to enter the skin very well. And then, of course, we will have what you see on this picture, right? The right-hand side picture is a picture that shows how the product enters entirely into the skin because it's very small in particle size. Because, as I said, it is a microemulsion triphase that has been homogenized. On the left-hand side, you see that a product like an emulsion that is probably not even triphase will stay mostly on the surface, will not penetrate deeply, will help the skin, yes, feel hydrated and fresh, but will not have many rejuvenating or anti-aging effects or any other purpose for that matter. So that's the difference and the reason why you want to do these processes. Of course, these processes take time and investment in order to be achieved. So what is the benefit in the end? You get thorough penetration, deeper penetration, even penetration. You get, of course, more preservation of the natural moisturizing factor, and you reduce the amount of water that the skin evaporates. And at the same time, you enhance the activity of the skin. So all in all, these are really good processes that help to prepare the formula for its purpose during application. So let me show you now an actual example of a Pavonia formula, like the case of the stem cells. This is the full list of the stem cells ingredients in the Pavonia product, right? So the cream has all these ingredients that you see here. And of course, these are all important ingredients for that cream to be, a cream that contains about 7 anti-aging ingredients in one cream, including retinol, including, of course, the stem cell protein extracts, including, of course, vitamin C and peptides, etc., including hyaluronic acid as well. So this is a very comprehensive formula, which is created with the triphase microemulsion system, right? So basically, the way this is created is you take all the water soluble